So I'm going to speak to you today, as Anne-Marie has said, about how you sell yourself in your project. Just a little bit of introduction, a bit more introduction about myself. So as Anne-Marie said, I'm Professor of Maternal and Child Health and Dean of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at Newcastle University. But I'm also have the pleasure of being the NIHR Doctoral Fellowship Panel Chair. I've been a member of that panel for a number of years, and I've been overall chair of the panel for the past 2 years. So I'm really sorry I couldn't join you in person, and I hope you can both hear me well enough and also you can see the slides. I'm really going to be drawing on my experience of being a panel chair and a panel member, but also in my own experience of applying for fellowships and projects. I've been on both sides of the table as a panel chair and also as an applicant. And I held a senior NIHR fellowship a few years ago. Okay, so in terms of this particular presentation, I'm sure you're all familiar with the 3 Ps, as it used to be: person, project, and place. Well, we've now moved on to the 5 Ps, which also includes patient and public involvement and prepare. So for today, I've been asked to focus on the person and project of the 5 Ps, but I'd also like to start with some comments about preparing for either a fellowship or a grant application. I'm not going to talk very much about patient and public involvement. I do mention it, but I'm not going to go into any depth because I know you've got a session on that coming up. Likewise, I will mention research question, but I'm not proposing to go into much depth in that because, again, you have a session of that coming up. Okay, so I said I would start with prepare. Anne-Marie has touched on some of this already, which just emphasizes the importance of preparing to start an application, whether it's a fellowship or whether it's a grant application. And to do that, you really need to know what your funder's process and their remit is. Most of what we are talking about today is around NIHR. But again, as we've already seen in the slide, there are a lot of funders. So it may be at different points of your career, you look to be funded outside of the NIHR and then to come back into it, for example. So do make sure you really understand what your funder's remit is and what they're looking for in an application. Contact the funders program managers. They are exceptionally wonderful and very helpful and are there really to answer your queries. So don't ever feel that you can't speak to the program managers if you have a query. If you are applying through the NIHR, then do speak to the research support service. They can give you a lot of great advice as well. And right from the beginning of the genesis of you thinking about your ideas and then how you're going to, which funder you're going to apply to, and which stream within a funder, start thinking about your PPI and get that going early. And it really has to be meaningful PPI, not as an afterthought or as an add-on. And that's very much would be seen by a panel looking at it if it wasn't really meaningful PPI. Another point is about knowing your audience. So look up previous award holders, contact them. People don't mind being contacted and sharing their experiences. Look at who the members of the panel are. They're all published on the website, so you can have a look, see what their topics of their specialty is, or if it's they've got methodology expertise. And talk to as many people that will talk to you about your ideas, about what you're planning to do ahead of any submission. It's much better to hear criticism from your colleagues or get constructive ideas from your colleagues than to get it from comments from reviewers. And a lot of applications involve maybe a 2-stage process, or there's an expression of interest involved. Take these all parts of the application seriously. You won't get beyond the stage 1 or the expression of interest if you don't meet what the funders are trying to do within their schemes. So take each stage very seriously. Okay, and then you probably are very familiar with this quote, but I think it really is important, by Benjamin Franklin: by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. All right, so now on to the person side of this. So it really is all about you. especially, of course, if you're applying for a fellowship. But even if you're applying for a project grant, this is about selling you in terms of your stage that you're at in your career and being able to have the skills and expertise to lead the application. So funders are looking for future research leaders, and you've got to demonstrate that you're on that trajectory. How do you demonstrate that? Well, that's really about what you've done to date. That's your publications, whether you've got some grants, your invitations, conference presentations, and any awards or prizes that you may have received. And it really depends on what level you're going for fellowship, for example, how many or how much of these that you might have. But remember, small grants are really important as well, especially if you can show a trajectory that you've maybe moved from winning a small grant to maybe winning a more medium-sized grant, or if you've been on a co-applicant in another grant and then you've moved to being a principal investigator. This is all demonstrating your trajectory as a future research leader. And it's really important for not only you to think about, but also for you to be able to get across how this fellowship will be that step change in your career. So why is the fellowship important now? Why is it the right route for you? If it's a project grant, why is this project the right timing for you in your career aspirations as well? Another area to think very carefully about are the collaborations or network that you've already established. So, are you working with national and international leaders in their fields, whether it's through their topics or whether it's methodologists? Have you started to build your own network and therefore gaining expertise and knowledge from those collaborators? Are you starting to develop other researches? So, are you contributing to capacity building? That could be through project supervision of students, masters, undergraduate students, or it could be starting to supervise research assistants, etc. So, how are you starting to contribute to the development of others? And then for any of this, it really is important that you show your commitment, and I would also say your passion for research as a career, so that you can communicate to the panel that this really is a career that you want to pursue, and that the fellowship or the project grant is part of that journey that you're on. And another area that I think is really important to emphasize, and some people don't shy away from including information in the contextual factors, but I would really encourage you to do so. So this is particularly for people who've maybe had caring responsibilities or maybe have been impacted particularly by COVID. That's just two examples. There are many others. And the panel will look at this and judge your application based on the amount of time that you've had available for research. So it's really important that you give them that information, which of course they will treat in confidence, so that they can understand exactly how much time you've been able to do research and the outputs that you've had associated with that research. Okay, so those couple of slides were really looking at what it is that you want to get across in an application. The next couple are really about what the errors might be in terms of the pitch. And I think one of the key things is that sometimes when you read an application, it really, especially if it's for a fellowship, it really sounds like it's just a means by securing an applicant's salary, rather than the opportunities that fellowships give you to make a real step change in your career. We've talked about the training programs a little bit earlier, and that is a really key thing in these fellowships, as well as your project and you as a person, etc. So it's really about making it clear that this is more than just securing a salary. Do that preparation, because what you don't want to get is feedback that you haven't been awarded something because you weren't at the right stage for that particular opportunity. So look at where you are in your own CV, get others to have a look at your CV and advise what it is, if you would be meet the criteria. We often get very good candidates, but they've just got the wrong project in terms of it. They haven't been able to really give the description of the project or, communicate what it is in the right way. And I'm, of course, going to go on to say a little bit more about that. Or we get really good candidates, but maybe they haven't quite got the support, or they haven't been able to communicate to the panels that they're working in an environment that we can truly know will support them. Or that it's clear that the candidate hasn't had the knowledge about the funder and what the funder is looking for, and that's come out. And to go back to sort of passion and commitment, sometimes candidates are just diffident about their own potential as future leaders. And this is not a time when you're writing an application to be shy. So where I work, up here in Newcastle, there's a saying, "Shy bairns getting out." This is the time not to be shy. And that's not comfortable for everyone, but you really do need to let the panel know all the great things that you've done and all the great things that you plan to do. Okay, so that was a bit of a whistle stop tour around you as the person, how to sell yourself. Now we move on to the project. And again, there are some commonalities, but there are also some things that I hope are new for you to think about. And a lot of this I've posed as questions for you maybe to take away and think about your project and to ask yourself as well. But again, absolutely paramount is that your project is at a level that it should be at for the scheme or the level of fellowship that you're applying to. Then we move on to more specific things like your research question. It's not only about drafting it, but is it answerable? And again, you'll hear a lot more about that in the future session. Are you employing the most appropriate methods to answer those questions? Are they the most up-to-date, novel methods? If you are using novel methods, have you shown that you've got the expertise to use those? And is your research that you're proposing both feasible, but also have you made it clear that you understand what the ethical considerations are, and that you've put enough information in to know the panel to know that you know what those ethical considerations are? Impact has always been important to funders, but I think it's fair to say that part is becoming even more important. So help the panel to really understand what the impact of your work will be. And then make it also clear that you are really up to date with the knowledge in your area. So you've done your scoping searches, you've found the literature in your area, and you can give a good representation of where the current state of the literature. There are many, many aspects of an application and of a project. Make sure you give all of them good attention. Don't think, because this isn't the case, that a panel looks at and gives more weight to one thing than it does to another. That's not the case. We want all aspects of your project to be clearly written and, as I said, be feasible, etc. And remember that you're writing for different audiences. You've, of course, got your specialists. There will be people who will be lead reviewers on your application because that's their area, or because they either developed or used the method that you plan to use. But you've also got generalists, and of course, you've also got lay experts. So you must speak to all of those individuals on the panel. I think one of the really important aspects of this is to get your message across in the summary, the lay summary and the scientific abstracts. Everybody will have read those. And there is a particular skill in writing both of these abstracts, and I would really encourage you to make sure you spend the time to get those right, get those reviewed by obviously PPI members if it's your lay summary, but also others to read your scientific summary as well. Your patient, public and service user benefits should be made really clear. I go back to my points at the beginning. This is not about having some token PPI. This is about meaningful PPI involvement from the beginning right through. And if you are funded, what that would look like going forward. Think about the outcome that you're trying to reach here in terms of your project. Is it the right one to fit the remit of the study? Have you described why it is the right one? And don't have too many outcomes, because that can lead to issues in terms of overburdening participants, etc. If it's appropriate, so if you're doing data work or quantitative work, you should state your sample size calculation, and it must be reproducible. So you must give a sufficient detail for those in the panel who may want to reproduce it. And of course, the statisticians on the panel will be looking at that very closely. You need to give a very clear statement about how you plan to recruit to your study, and that's not only how you're going to reach the target number as set out by your sample size calculation, for example, but also whether you've got enough time to do it. Also building in that there will be dropouts, so that you need to show that you've thought about attrition and how that will impact on your project. And as we've already discussed in Anne-Marie's opening, equality, diversity and inclusion, or research inclusion, is incredibly important. So how are you going to make sure you've got a diverse sample as is possible? Coming now to an analysis plan, obviously you need to have one. You need to justify why you're taking a particular approach, whether it's statistical approach for quantitative data, or whether or describe your approach if it's qualitative, and indeed if it's mixed methods, you might want to also describe how you're going to integrate the data. This is about us stating not just what you're doing, but why you've made certain decisions there as well. And I think it's very common now to have what we call interconnecting projects. So you might have a number of work packages that all build on each other, for example. So what happens if one of the earlier work projects is not delivered? What will that impact be on the rest of your project? So think about what your plan B would be, and even sometimes plan C. Okay, so now moving on to timelines. You will all have had an opportunity at some point to produce a Gantt chart. These are really important. The panels do look at them. They look at the individual deliverables or milestones and make sure that it all seems to fit into plan and is feasible. So you must be realistic. And just as an example here that we had recently, of a course, a very important course being included in the Gantt chart, which was great, but it was after the work package had completed that required that course. So we do look at these things, we do look across and make sure things add up. So do spend the time showing your timeline and the different milestones. Okay, now to some errors in the project relating to what I've just said. So these could be things like you've assumed too much specialist knowledge. So again, remember you've got generalists on the panels and you've got lay members, so you're writing for all of those. It may be that your project just seemed to be too high risk, and that's because you haven't perhaps done enough exploratory work, or you haven't described the scoping and exploratory work that you've done. Especially in fellowships, it's okay to take a little bit of a risk, but obviously we don't want projects that are too high risk, because it's not the intention of any funder to set you up to fail. Your research questions may not be clear enough. They may raise questions in the minds of the reviewers about whether they link directly to your work packages, etc. You may not have linked in with the right people, and especially if you do have a series of interconnecting work packages, you might need different expertise that you may not as an individual have, and you would want to bring people in. And crucially, you haven't answered the so what question. So what will the difference be if I get this funded? What will that lead to? And what would the status quo look like if it wasn't funded? And some other feedback is around not linking it all into what the funder is looking for, their own remit, and your public patient involvement is inadequate. And the final point here is, as I mentioned before, sometimes you might be applying for something that has a stage 1, stage 2, or an expression of interest into the main application. If you get referee or panel comments at any of those stages, take them seriously and address them. Ignore them at your peril. Okay, so those are my thoughts. I've done what any good researcher will do, and I've gone and looked at some of the literature around this, of which there is a lot. And this was just one paper that caught my eye, which is by a Professor Masood Hussain, and it's in the journal Practical Neurology. I've given you the reference there if you are interested in reading a little bit more about it. But I was really struck by the first sentence in this paper, which is successful grant writing takes careful thought as well as considerable skill. And that is so true. This is around skill development, about writing grant applications like anything else you would do. And we've all, no matter what stage you are in your career, have had successes, but we've also had failures. And it's learning from both, learning from what didn't get funded as well as learning from what did get funded. My intention isn't to go through the 10 reasons for rejections here. I'm going to leave that there for you to do. Some of them we've touched upon. There may be others relevant there as well. Okay, and then in the last couple of slides, I just wanted to also consider a little piece of advice around how you approach writing a fellowship or a project grant. I speak to a lot of people very early on in their journey who are thinking about applying for a fellowship, not only at the doctoral level, but advanced and more senior. And I always advise them to write out in a paragraph, something short, what it is they want to do, why them, and what it'll lead to. And I always find if people are struggling to write that, then they haven't got enough clarity in their ideas at that stage. Another way to do this, which is becoming even more the way, is elevator pitches, which I'm sure you've all heard of. But these are concise, compelling introductions that can be communicated in the amount of time it takes you to get to the floor you want in the lift. They are usually between 1 and 3 minutes. A lot of conferences are doing now 3-minute elevator pitches. They usually are a lot shorter than that. But it really is a way to help you galvanize your thoughts around what it is you want to do. So it's about selecting the highlights of your work and then making sure you can frame it so that it's appealing not just to the scientific members of any panel, but also your lay members. Uh, I've looked at a few examples of these, and I've just thought I would come up with my suggestion about how you might want to approach this in 3 areas. So one is about who you're writing for. Really have a think about who your audience is, who those panel members are, and also base it around telling a story. Everybody likes to hear a story. It's more appealing, and it makes you want to hear more. A great way to do that is to start with a quote or to start with a figure, a number around the condition that it is that you're planning on looking at. Then it's about what is your message? What is it you're trying to get across? So think about the problem that you're investigating. Why is it relevant? What is the current situation? What are the gaps? Why does it matter? So that impact, what are the potential benefits as well? And then when you've sort of crafted this, go back over it and make sure you're using an active voice, but also that you're not using lots of jargon and overcomplicated language. So that's just a couple of slides about an approach that you could take very early on when you're planning a project, grant, or a fellowship. But it's also if you're going along to a conference where you may meet lots of people that you want to meet in your field, lots of experts, that when they say, what is it you do? Or what is it you want to do? You can very concisely, but in a sort of engaging way, talk to them about what it is you want to do. Okay, I'm conscious of time and I'm going to wrap this up. So hopefully there's been something in there for all of you in terms of how you think about selling yourself or how you think about selling your project. But a few sort of things I'd really like you to take away. Start early, give yourself as much time as possible to write these applications. Writing an application takes a lot longer than you think. Writing an excellent one takes even longer. So give yourself plenty of time. Know and adhere to the guidelines that the funder publishes and their criteria. I often say to people, make the funder's website your best friend for the months that you're doing these applications and get all the advice and criticism that you can get while you're preparing the application. As I said, it's better to get it at that stage than to get it through reviewers' feedback. If it is a fellowship you're going to, it's so important to show that you own your own work, that this is your work, it's not your supervisors or etc., or it's not a project grant you're trying to fit into a fellowship application. So make sure you have that ownership. and that you are committed to this. You show your commitment, your passion, because they are looking for future research leaders. And as I said, impact, impact, impact. So show how your work will lead to impact. And then finally, an area of the application procedure that often is rushed at the end or doesn't get as much attention is make sure that the presentation of the application is as good as it can be. So that's not only things like making sure you haven't got typos and extra lines in, but also read across your application so that it makes sense and is consistent right the way across, from your abstracts through your projects through to other aspects of your application. Okay, and then I just thought I would end. I've written a blog about this for the NIHR as the Doctoral Fellowship Chair. My colleagues have done one similarly for the Advanced Fellowship. The co-chairs have written one for the Advanced Fellowship. So they're there just if you're interested. And find that, that's it from me. So thank you very much.
Judith, you're still there. You disappeared. Thank you.
Hi, Judith. It was an excellent presentation. I enjoyed it so much. I have one question about developing other researchers. Could you elaborate on this point, please, in a context of final year PhD students who might teach, and that could count as developing other researchers, but might not have possibilities to supervise undergrad or master students?
Yeah, sorry, I can't see anyone, so thank you very much for your question. Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's not that it's an essential criteria or anything. It's just a really, really important part of this whole research journey. So the best way to do it is through undergraduate and master's levels student supervision, but I understand that's maybe not possible for everyone. So it might be that you supervise other members of staff within, if you're a practitioner or a clinician, it may be that you've started to supervise some other colleagues within your setting, and that kind of thing would look really good. Or that you're supervising an aspect of somebody else's work. Again, it's just showing any example where you've had the opportunity to sort of bring someone else along. Obviously, as you move up your career, there will be more opportunities. You will start to supervise researchers, etc. I'm conscious at this stage there's not always as many opportunities as for everyone. But if you do have an opportunity, then I would suggest that you should try and take it.
Brilliant. Okay, Judith, thank you so much for joining us. It's really important, not just for the task at hand, but for certainly this community going forward. So we're very grateful for you joining us. So thank you.